Bismillah, alhamdulillah, wa salatu wa salamu ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. All praises to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala who enabled us to do the good deeds we are doing. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala enabled us to continue to do these good deeds throughout this month of Ramadan and beyond. Allah accept our fasting in the day, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accept our standing in the night of Taraweeh. As I mentioned a number of times previously, this month of Ramadan primarily is about fasting. But then alongside the month of Ramadan, one of the things that stands out is the importance of the prayer. And I mentioned earlier that the fasting will end with the end of the month. So we won't be left with the fasting anymore. But the prayer is something that should be a daily part of our lives, on a daily basis, on a weekly basis, our connection to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So this month of Ramadan serves as a wonderful opportunity to connect with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We don't want to create temporary connections. We want to create permanent connections. Connection to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala means forgiveness of sins. Connection to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala means to embrace His mercy and His forgiveness. And connection to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala ultimately is peace and tranquility in our lives. So we don't want a temporary connection, we want a permanent connection. And Allah has obliged us to worship Him and created us to worship Him. وَمَا خَلَقْتُ الْإِنسَ وَالْجِنَّ إِلَّا لِيَعْبُدُونَ. We didn't create the jinn kind and the human kind except for our worship. It's the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that even though the whole objective of our lives is to worship Him, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sets 5 timings in a day in which we need to stand and perform the duty of worship. Those 5 timings symbolize us worshipping Him constantly. If we worship Him in these 5 times, we are counted as worshipping Him constantly, and that fulfills our purpose of life, which is to worship Allah. And look at the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. These 5 timings Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave, Allah didn't say you need to worship at this precise timing. Allah gives windows of timings. Allah, with every prayer, you have a timing and flexibility in there. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala didn't want us to have any excuses. So it's not that we have to be standing in worship at our precise timing. As long as we are worshipping Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, performing the prayer within the timing of each of the prayers, that's fine. We've done our duty to Allah. And this is a great mercy from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Firstly, why has Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala even set 5 timings? Islam is ultimately about balance. And the more you learn about Islam and our deen, the more you realize how finely balanced it is. We are neither at one extreme, nor we are at the other extreme. And I guarantee you can look at any subject area in Islam, you will find that we are always in the middle. Look at the prayer itself. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala could have ordained the prayer to be at precise timings. It would be very, very difficult for us. On the other end of the spectrum, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala could have said to us, pray 5 times any time of the day. Allah didn't say pray any time of the day. Allah fixed the timings and gave us flexibility. Why? Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doesn't want us to become lazy, because the human nature is that when we have the option to do something, we become lazy. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala fixed the timings in the day to pray the 5 daily prayers at these specific timings. At the same time, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala did not want to make it extremely difficult for us. Allah gave us flexibility in that. If you look at the prayer itself, and also one thing that's very, very important is that one of the scholars, Ibn al-Jawzi, Abdul Rahman Ibn al-Jawzi, rahimahullah ta'ala, he says something very, very beautiful. He says that the servant who serves his master with a little bit of service but regularly is better than the servant who serves his master intensely for a short amount of time. Remember these words, they are very powerful words. They're not my words, the words of a great scholar, Shaykh Abul Faraj Abdul Rahman Ibn al-Jawzi from the 600 Hijris, right? Nearly 800 years ago, maybe beyond 800 years ago. So some beautiful words. And there's a strong reminder, because in the month of Ramadan, many will become connected to the mosques, we become connected to the worship, right? But when Ramadan is over, then our worship is gone, our connection to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is packed away, and we're waiting for the next year, right? And perhaps sometimes we delude it, thinking that that is sufficient, right? Remember, the servant who does a little for a long period of time is better than the servant who does a lot for a short period of time, right? In the same way, if we want to be true servants of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then we need to give a service to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala of worship that is constant. Right? It doesn't have to be a huge amount of worship. The Prophet ﷺ said that أَحَبُّ الْأَعْمَالِ إِلَى اللَّهِ أَدْوَمُهَا وَإِنْ قَلَّ. The most beloved of actions for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala are those actions which are constant and regular, even if they're small actions. They don't have to be big actions. They can be small actions. or regularity in your worship is a sign of sincerity. And so sincerity is what makes small actions become very, very big actions. So Allah gives us those people to do this. So I just want to mention a couple of things regarding the prayer. So the prayer, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us a beautiful prayer. Many people say when we pray we don't feel presence in the prayer, we don't understand what we're saying. The prayer has different levels. And for every person they have their own level. And we shouldn't compare ourselves to other people. Like I said earlier in Ramadan, there's only one person we need to beat, and that's our former self. We just need to beat who we were before. If we've done that after Ramadan, we're successful, alhamdulillah. We've taken at least steps forward. And that's what we should be thinking about. In the prayer, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us different things to do at different levels. At the very, very basic level, we have the physical action of the prayer. The first step for a person is to understand those physical actions. We begin the prayer with what's known as the international sign of surrender. Yeah? What is this? When you raise your hands, you are surrendering. We are raising our hands to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, surrendering to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It doesn't matter you don't understand any words. Actions, every person from every language can understand actions. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala put actions in the prayer that you don't need to have specific languages to understand. So the first action is we raise our hands in surrender to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the King of all kings. Imagine you are surrendering to some great respectful person upon the earth. Yeah? And how much fear you would have is surrendering yourself to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Then we stand as a slave stands before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The first action we do is we stand before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with our heads bowed and our hands tied as a servant stands before his master. The whole of the prayer is a journey in lowering ourselves to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So the first lowering is we have our heads lowered before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Then we increase in our lowering before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in humility. We begin to bow ourselves down to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right? That's the next level. Then we stand up straight before we do the prostration, because we're not going to do a prostration from the middle. We're going to do a complete prostration. So that standing, the only purpose that standing serves is to do a complete prostration from the standing position. Right? That action is called qawma. According to Imam Abu Yusuf, who's the senior student of Imam Abu Hanifa, it's wajib to do that. Like it's completely stand up. So we need to pay attention to these things and make sure we're doing it correctly. Then we lower ourselves as much as we can lower ourselves, and we touch our forehead into the ground. Right? That is what the prayer is about. And I mentioned this earlier, that if you cannot prostrate on the ground, then there's no more physical prayer left. Then all you do is you gesture with the head for ruku a little bit and gesture further for the prostration. Okay? One of the other things I mentioned is that you have two prostrations. There's many reasons that scholars are given. Ultimately, all knowledge lies with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Like, our efforts in order to derive wisdoms are still going to be a human effort. Right? If Allah has told us something, then we guarantee. Otherwise, we don't have absolute certainty. But in some things, we can have strong presumptions because we can see from the actions what we mean. So, in the prostration, we have two prostrations. And I mentioned earlier, the second prostration, one of the strongest statements is that it is there to do the second prostration, our gratitude that Shaitan did not do one, we're going to do two. Right? Our gratitude to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala who enables us to do one, we're going to do a second one to show gratitude to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and do something twice that Shaitan didn't do once. Yeah, and twice is the door to repetition and infiniteness. The other thing that scholars have mentioned, and this last thing I mentioned, is that if you look at the prostrations, when you go into the prostration, you come out of the first prostration. It's symbolic of our lives. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created us from the earth. وَمِنْهَا خَلَقْنَاكُمْ. From it, from the ground, we created you. Then we sit for a very brief amount of time. Most of us don't recite anything. If someone wants to recite something, they can recite a very short dua, Rabbi Ighfirli, for example, is something advised. And then we go back into the prostration, مِنْهَا خَلَقْنَاكُمْ وَفِيهَا نُعِيدُكُمْ. And then we return you back into the ground. Our second prostration represents us, our death and our burial in the ground. وَمِنْهَا نُخْرِجُكُمْ تَارَةً أُخْرَى. Then we raise you from the ground a second time, resurrection, judgment. We stand up completely straight for the second unit prayer, reminding us of the day we're going to be resurrected before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we're going to stand up. Right? The time between the two prostrations is very, very brief, which reminds us our lives are very, very brief. They're not long. So we need to make use of these lives. And the best use and the only use that's acceptable is worship of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Going back to the first point, that is just small amounts of time in the day. A couple of times in a day we worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and we get counted as if we worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala constantly.
Allah.
And what more can you have than that? You know, if you do overtime and you get paid double, we do all of the overtime and then you get paid as well. You get paid without even doing the time here. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is literally paying you without even doing the time. You show up to work a couple of times in a day, you will get your full wage. Nothing will be deducted. Right? How thankful should we be to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Allah enable us to be His grateful servants, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make us from those who are constant in our worship. Just a quick reminder, obviously alhamdulillah you've been blessed to stand behind Hafizab and Ustad Rahman and listen to the beautiful recitation in the Tarawih. Just a reminder that it's the time for us to show them support now as well. So inshallah we need to dig deep into our hearts and try to give a gift that's fulfilling. The reality is that we can't gift them what they've gifted us. It's impossible for us to do that. Well, we should try our best to match something, and with our intention, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will raise it to that level as well. We really appreciate the Hufaz for leading us so beautifully. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant the honor in this dunya and honor in the akhirah. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala fulfill all of the du'as.